Hi, welcome to the Indie Wine Podcast. My name is Matt Wood, and this is episode 74. Today I'm talking with Pietro Buttitta from Prima, Materia, and local vines. After a career in food service, Pietro has spent the last decade or so farming in Lake County at about 1,400 feet elevation, focusing mostly on Italian varieties. He's also done some consulting, and so we also discuss this fun new project in the La Miranda area of Contra Costa County. A quick reminder that there's a Patreon at patreon.com/indiewinepodcast. The link is in the show notes also. Any amount to help me keep telling wine stories ad-free and available for everyone is appreciated. Telling a friend is a great way to help out too. Here we go. Where did your interest in food and wine come from?
I'm a little bit of an outlier on this. Most of the people I know, they had a wine experience, either going to Europe or dining, something like that really opened up their eyes, and then they became passionate about it. I'm the opposite. I came from a very poor family that never went anywhere. Certainly no vacations, didn't really eat out, a lot of kids. But for a period in time, my grandfather... Well, I'll give you the whole Italian story. My great-grandfather emigrated. They slowly made their way across the country. They had a little bit of business savvy. My great-grandfather, who I did not know, was a hardworking guy and kind of leveled himself up by the bootstraps. My grandfather worked with him a lot, and they came out to California, I think, in, I want to say, mid-1930s.
Okay.
Property being available, they landed in Palo Alto, San Jose area.
Okay. Yep.
So purchased little orchards, 10 acres, would kind of hang on to it for a while, farm it to cover expenses, and then move on to something maybe twice as big.
Okay.
Hang on to it. My grandfather took that, he managed to cobble things together, and eventually moved to Santa Rosa, which is where I'm from in Sonoma County.
Okay. Yeah.
He ultimately purchased... I don't know how large it really was, but it must have been about maybe 150 acres total.
Okay.
Right at the intersection of River Road, which is the road that runs out to the coast. If you think of the Russian River Valley sort of proper, because it extends all the way to Healdsburg, but it was right there. So for 6 years, really impressionable age, like 4 to 10, we were on this 42-acre piece of property. There were 20 acres of grapes on it, approximately. Bunch of old prune trees, so we picked prunes, and then we went into grape season. A couple other little miscellaneous bits and pieces. French Colombard, Carignan. There was in the back, I remember as a kid, I was just super fascinated by these old vine, chasselas vines. And they're just these grizzled, gnarly looking, just a few rows of them, but they were just, I don't know. Somehow there was some sort of connection there.
Yeah.
So I've always been comfortable around grapevines. I never had a thought about getting into wine. Kind of parallel with that, I would watch like great French chefs on KQED, public television at the age of 10. And I was just fascinated by that. I don't know why, but there was something about shimmering aspic and, truffled eggs on gelée and, white cakes with caramelized violets on them. Like, I don't know where that came from because we never ate any of that stuff. We were we were a big family, eating on a budget. So
food there.
Yeah. And maybe that was the attraction, but it just really captured my attention. So as a kid, I tried to bake cakes and just do really simple stuff. So I definitely had an interest in food. Or at least that sort of, if not the technique of food, but like the aesthetic sensibility and then sort of imagining like what this must be like to actually experience, which I didn't make it to, didn't go to Europe. So I was 45 or something like that. So didn't really know what to do with that. I mean, there certainly aren't any cooks in my family. It wasn't a big education family. It was very much sort of Italian immigrant sentiment, unfortunately, because I was a bookish kid. I liked to read. Would have gotten pretty good grades if I had applied myself, and probably should have gone on to college, but it just it wasn't something that boys in my family did, kind of thing. So I did do it eventually. But I didn't actually make the move and say, hey, I want to cook until I was already in my 30s and I was already I'd been going to Portland State University for a few years and studying philosophy. I was like, this is not really gonna go anywhere. Yeah. I was also racing bicycles at the time pretty seriously. Oh, nice. So I was like, I kind of need a balance between, intellectual and physical. I'm definitely not getting that now. In my 20s, I hopped freight trains and lived with punk rockers and did nothing constructive, but dabbled in a lot of different things. Okay. But I was always the guy in the house who would plan, I want to try moussaka tonight. And of course, you're living in a house with 15 other people and there are no plates and you got to clean the place. So it was always a bit of a burden. But I was the person who liked to cook. Later on, I would always plant a garden every house I rented. I was always the guy who had a bunch of pepper plants and eggplant in the backyard if I could, trying to get warmer climate things to grow in cold places, sometimes not successfully. But yeah, eventually I took the leap. It's okay, I got to be an adult and figure out what am I actually, what do I want to do the next 5 years? So I spent some time trying to find a job in Portland, applied to 42 different jobs. And I think I was a little bit of a weirdo being in my mid-30s. And I'm like, hey, I don't have any culinary resume whatsoever, but my knife skills are pretty good. And I can tell you how to make a bechamel just because I was reading a lot. And it's I was actually into the body of knowledge. And I ended up going to culinary school, which was sort of like a last-ditch kind of thing. But then that allowed me to finally get into kitchens and start working. So the school was not a great experience, and it was closed and source of lawsuits and all of that. But that was my entry point. Okay. So a bit of French training there, cooked full-time, seriously, aggressively trying to climb a ladder. I also, I had a house. I missed the partying in kitchens because I was already a little too old and a little bit of, the one thing I wish life-wise was that I had started cooking earlier and gone to New York when I was 22 and didn't need money and my body was more resilient so I could sleep on floors and go, work 80 hours a week at some fine dining place and just sort of keep doing that. But I did the best I could, the equivalent of that. I came down for a little bit and worked in Napa Valley at Terra, which is closed now, but that was a good, I was trying to get into French Laundry and could have gone to Bouchon at the time to do my internship, but I wanted to work in a real small restaurant that was actually functional and standalone and, not a big chain of command, big ship kind of thing, which was great. Hirosone was a great chef. I really enjoyed the crew working there. A lot of them went on to open great restaurants and get Michelin stars and all of that. So did that, went back to Portland, and it was just food, poring over cookbooks every night. When I was a sous chef, I would always have a couple menus in my back pocket ready to go, and just really pushing.
Just in case.
But so it would look like, I just pulled this out of my ass. I mean, sometimes a little preparation goes a long way. Yeah. But the downside of that was I burned myself out. I mean, I really... somewhere in there, I sort of lost, not the joy of food because I still like exploring things, but I try to explain to people that I don't like eating, but I like food. I am not one of those gluttonous sort of I shouldn't say that because there are certain things, of course, that I will shove in my face until I'm sick. But I just kind of an intellectual component to it, a problem solving thing that I really enjoy with food, but I sort of lost that passion for flavors and balancing and all of that for a while. Took a little bit of time off, spent a quick, because I just needed a break. It was full burnout. I don't want to do this anymore. I don't know what I'm doing. I got to get out of here. I was working at a restaurant, chef de cuisine, and the chef kept promising me he would leave and I would take over. It just kept going and going, and he wasn't showing up for work, and I was actually the chef. But It was just too much. So I helped out at a winery, just picking grapes, doing basic stuff, and got back into the sunlight and felt, 100-degree heat again, got stung by bees. And part of growing up in agriculture, I remember the smells of going to the Sunsweet fruit processing plant and dropping off the prunes.
Yeah.
Very sort of visceral, those primal smells are very activating. But then also going to Sebastiani and dumping off a 10-ton gondola of French Colombard, and hosing it out, and just those sort of, it was always sort of there in the back of my mind a little bit. I just didn't know that those neurons were sleeping kind of thing. So those really, something sparked those back to life. Turned out if you like a little bit of technical food, then jumping into wine is not that big a change. A portion of good cooking is good sanitation, and knowing temperatures and knowing a little bit of food science goes a long way. Turns out the same happens with wine, where it's a lot of intuitive feel, but there are some underpinnings that are very helpful to have. So the transition from working in a kitchen full time to wine full time felt like the actual production side, and then figuring out just shoot thinning, planting vines, trellising, pruning, like that all felt very natural. And that dovetailed really nicely. Like the business side of it and actually having your own brand, that's a whole other learning curve that I am not like marketing is my nemesis.
I don't think you're alone.
Yeah, no, I think it's definitely a thing in the industry. But definitely, I think of myself as a craftsperson. I'm proud of that. I'm not a visionary. I'm not an artist. I like, even today, if I'm making wine that I like stuff that hews to classic things done. So when we go eat at restaurants, my wonderful girlfriend and I, we just had an experience where we had a great time out, loved it, great evening. Food sucked. Okay. I mean, we could rattle off the list for every course that came through as to why this could have been better and how. But it was a great experience, and I really enjoyed it. Wine is kind of the same thing, where I like the interesting things. I like the well-executed technique is great. It makes me happy. But it can also be sterile and soulless. And how do you get those two things together?
Sure.
Is sort of the aesthetic puzzle. And that was kind of the same thing with food, where I was trying to make food that had, a good balance and all of that, but that had a little bit of a narrative thread through it. These are why these flavors, because they actually have a historical kind of thing. And if you think about the grain and the acid in the dish and whatever, there's might be a little bit of a historical angle to why these flavors work together.
Historical precedent. Maybe
and that works with wine too, because a lot of these grapes, especially I focus on Italian grapes that all sort of have these weird apocryphal stories, and they're all interrelated and things like that. But there are a lot of really cool, we were talking about Refosco a little bit.
Yeah.
I don't even know that I like the Refosco grape. I'm not even sure I like Refosco wine, any of them that I've had. But I find them endlessly fascinating, and they make me happy.
Okay.
I'm not sure that they're unctuous. I'm not sure that they are, all those things that a lot of consumers like. I find them challenging. They're iodine. They're bloody. They're a little bitter. There's some harsh pepper to it. The acidity is always a little bit wonky. It's almost like there's a strange... some of the acids are a little weird that occur in the grape, but all those warts and ugly things are what really make it compelling.
Yeah, you just find yourself drawn to it because of that.
It's a puzzle. I'm trying to understand a puzzle.
Yeah.
So, and I'm not sure, again, if you have your own wine label, is that the best approach to take? I don't know. Don't learn from me. But that sort of transition from food to wine, I guess, it's a little bit more intellectual than just gustatory for me. So, long answer.
Yeah.
Some of it goes back to childhood. And so the short answer is that I come to wine through grapes and vineyards. That was the first entry point. Okay. I never, even when I was 30, I didn't know what was in a Rioja. I was working hard in these restaurants, and occasionally somebody would give me a glass of something and I'd be really fascinated by it. But, I was thinking about tomorrow's menu and whether or not I had ordered a case of tomatoes. I wasn't like sitting down with the sommelier, really educating myself. I wish I had that resource. But so then once I got into wine, my challenge was just like, how do I learn about this? And I'm also sequestered up in Lake County where there isn't much wine culture. There are no classes going on. There isn't much to do. So I did some sommelier certification and just a lot of reading, go to professional tastings as much as possible, and did some wine retail once I moved down to the Bay Area in 2014, which really helped expand the palate and to understand a little more of a global context. And of course, in the Bay Area, you've got, from Georgian orange wines to every style you can imagine sort of collides here. So there's a lot to unearth and a lot of beautiful stuff to find.
So just kind of went on exploratory trip learning wines, well, not trip.
Yeah, I don't
went somewhere. But
I pretty much anything I can imagine. Cool climate Rieslings to hot weird grapes, red, white, pink. Like there's something fascinating and beautiful, and as a winemaker, a puzzle as far as execution that's interesting to me.
What kind of drew you to Italian grapes or Italian wines? And I guess does that...
Yeah, it could have gone...
How does Lake County and the vineyard kind of fit in with all of that?
That could have gone either way. Nebbiolo, as I think it is for a lot of people, like I did a Barbaresco tasting that I went to, and it was just the first thing that like all of the neurons fired at once. Like, holy cow, this is... I like those really vertical wines that have a lot of layers and they decompress in the middle and sort of fold out into all these opposing things all at once. So I don't really gravitate towards like the bigger Petit Verdot. And of course, early on, 16% Zinfandel was like, whoa, this is crazy. My development was the same as anybody else. Sweet Sauvignon Blanc from New Zealand was like, that's the biggest gooseberry I've ever eaten in my life. And I think those are important moments to have where you feel like you're actually like connecting with the profile and like, oh, I'm starting to understand what cat pee is. The Italian grapes, though, and again, gross generalization, we're talking about hundreds and hundreds of grapes made in hundreds of different styles these days. But it's a puzzle. Like Italian wine is so confusing. Yeah. And it's just not even just the stories, but the DNA and the interrelating things and the whole Sangiovese DNA all up and down the peninsula is remarkable. So that part's kind of cool. In general, I was finding that a lot of the Italian wines, they push back on you a little bit. They aren't necessarily hedonistic, which is something that I just don't find the hedonism interesting in the same way that I find something that's sort of like, it's a little too tannic, it's a little too acidic, it's a little weird and funky when I open it. Those little nuances really engage me. And with Italian wine, and even, I've grown and made, 2008, 15 vintages of Dolcetto. And that goddamn grape, sometimes I feel like I'm actually getting somewhere and understanding what it wants to do in this location, which it shouldn't even really be in, at least as far as climate and soil types that it prefers. But like, I could spend my whole life trying to get a decent Dolcetto that had some sort of facet that I felt was finally like, it's finally expressing some sort of inner thing. I could be 80 and I'll still hate that grape. I hate it in the vineyard. I hate working with it. I don't like how it grows. I don't like the propensity for mildew. I don't like how it dumps its acidity. I don't like the blocky tannin, like all these things I don't like about it. But I guess I kind of love it because of all these things I don't like about it.
Yeah. And
Italian wine sets itself up for that in a way that the great French grapes don't, which is, again, gross generalization.
How much are you trying to sort of hew to the style that the grape is in Italy? How much are you looking for Italy for inspiration? Because I guess, you're growing pretty wide range of varieties.
Yeah, and some things
sort of
don't
stuff
fit.
Throughout Italy, but in one climate or one vineyard. And
in a way, it's not very interesting, and it's the same answer everybody would give, is that, like, I'm trying to respect the history of the grape while finding its expression in this location.
Okay.
Which is true. But you also have to prioritize on some level. So I think for me early on, trying to be closer to quote unquote varietal correctness was probably the first goal. Just so I felt like I could understand, here's square one. And then moving towards, okay, well, this is acidic volcanic soil with big summer heat spikes and, a lot of bound iron and then you start moving to the second base, which is, what does this place say through that entry point, maybe. And it's all very fuzzy. Like, do I have an answer for what Lake County wants to say with Dolcetto? Strangely enough, for a grape that's drunk young in 95% of circumstances, if you take it to 14% alcohol and full ripeness in the California sense, it wants 5 years in the bottle before it moves to it. Like, counterintuitive stuff like that starts to evolve. And now consistently it's like that. Does that mean I'm getting close to some sort of correct answer for this location? I'm not sure, because I also did like a 12.5% one co-fermented with Chardonnay. That was beautiful. And the co-ferment actually brought out non-Dolcetto elements. Like it was actually spicy, meaty in a way that Syrah is, that you can kind of catch a little glimpse with. But like, would that have been traditional style Dolcetto? Yeah, probably not. I don't know. I know it's a simple thing. I should have an easy answer for like what is the old versus the new versus the place. But it's such, well, especially with different vintages too.
Sure.
We just had another hot one after a very cold one after 118 degree one, followed by 3 inches of rain a day later. Like, what the hell was that? What stylistically, what are the connecting points between those 3 years? It's a stretch.
Yeah. Do you find yourself using techniques that maybe aren't traditional to try to get back to something tasting traditional? Like maybe like whole cluster or there's things like that.
That's just where I was going to go. There have been a lot of whole cluster experiments. I'm not sure that Lake County, given the altitude and the soil type and the very compressed growing season, is particularly good with legitimate, 50% stomp it whole cluster. Because it's not a long, smooth, moderate growing season most years. It's pretty intense. We start a couple weeks later than Napa or Sonoma. Pretty much all the altitudes over 1,300 feet. There's a lot of wind. So, but I've spent a lot of time de-stemming and then drying stems and then pitching them back and doing different increments of that. Different experiments. The current Dolcetto I was trying to get some green pepperiness into it, and it's about 25% whole cluster, and it wasn't there, and it wasn't there. The tannin was so harsh because it extracted extra. I hate it. 2019. And the last few months, it's finally shifted into this like little bit of a window where it's like, oh, this is almost a little bit Cab Franc at the moment with would that fit in the traditional paradigm? No, I don't think so. Is it interesting? Like, oh, yeah. I mean, as a small business, I don't like sitting on wine for 5 years, especially freaking Dolcetto for it to become drinkable for somebody to buy for $20. But there's some little piece of knowledge in there. There's some little glimmer of something that is applicable and has a place in future. For me, because I'm also the vineyard crew, a lot of it has to do with sun exposure. Some things I don't thin rigorously like I used to. Okay. Some things I want. A lot of growers, like if you're a big grower, if you have 100 acres, most old school growers, they will say that they want 100% like consistent fruit. Like every grape I pick is 24.2 bricks and 3.47 pH. Like it's perfect. For this small sort of thing that I'm doing, which is a little by the seat of the pants and iterative, no, and some of the grapes I want, like with the Refosco, I'm trying to keep some of that primal raw acidity in there. And a couple of years, I experimented with picking in 2 different passes, one for acid and spice, then another one for ripe purple fruit, which turned out pretty well. I should actually check in on that, but it was very abrasive at first. Like the wine club was like, we don't want any more of that. Now a couple of them are hooked on it. But there were also a couple of years where like, I'm going to leave a certain amount of the suckers and, the second crop, and then maybe we experiment with that. Maybe it's not about having like Napa clean 2 bud per spur, perfect sun exposure. And because I don't have high-tech equipment, I'm using shovels and Home Depot buckets. Yeah. But maybe that roughness around the edges in the vineyard translates into something in the wine. I like long fermentations. So, we have really basic equipment. The pump is terrible and beats the hell out of all the grapes anytime we pump everything. So I started just moving things by picking tub directly into bins for fermentation. And it made a big difference in the feel of the tannin, even the arc of the fermentation. Like this is, if I hadn't quit kitchens, I don't doubt that if I hadn't gotten into wine, I'd probably be either making cheese or I'd be one of the bread weirdos. Just narrow and deep things where there are only a couple of factors and a couple of ingredients involved, but there's a multitude of choices and maturation. And, I'd be trying to figure out like what seeds do I add to the pasture for the cows to get the da-da-da and the toma kind of questions. And grape is the same way. So
some of your grapes, I think probably Sangiovese and Nebbiolo specifically, you have a few different clones out there. Does that help you with the kind of that spice box, or maybe not ripening quite as
I want to think it does, but it's also at a price because and I don't market these as natural wine. I have a lot of problems with the natural wine movement. And also a lot of love for the general principles, which I am a part of. So specifically with the Sangiovese, 5 different clones, 5 different pick times. I can pick the Biondi Santi last and get leathery, big tannin, like rustic, big Brunello style. All the way down to the Prugnolo Gentile, which is super thin-skinned and aromatic and wiry and almost unpleasant, but somehow graceful at the same moment. Which is cool. Like I like being able to control those things to try to get something to a model, like you were asking earlier. But there's sort of an ethical price you pay, I think. Like, does the wine have an immediate liveliness to it? Like, is the narrative thread, does it cohere in the same way as if we had just field blended the whole damn thing and had all these different parts coming together and then sort of melding over time?
So these are different blocks. The Sangiovese is
different row orientations too. And so when I picked those separately, there was one year I kept them all separate in separate barrels and was actually, this is right before the wine downturn, like I was going to release a set of the 5 different clones and bottle 1 barrel of each and then blend the rest. Awesome. Never happened. It was also 2021, which was the shortest, most terribly, kept going home every day because there just weren't any damn grapes. So never got around to it, but there were clearly like, yeah, very clear differences between them and nuances. And yeah, but just like building a stock, like do you leave it on the burner for 24 hours or you do 2 hours? You add your aromatics right at the end so they're bright and fresh and you can taste the carrot, or do you like boil the shit out of everything and get a real meaty, like slightly stinky? These are all choices. I don't know that one is better than the other. With the Nebbiolo, I did the opposite and I randomized the clones and just interplanted them all so that I wouldn't know. But what I do know is that one of those 3 clones hates the heat and raisins. And about 12 days before the other ones feel like they're fully ready, it's like, you got to pick me now, dude. Okay. So I'm shriveling here and I'm losing the Nebbiolo-ness. So I don't know if there's one answer.
Yeah.
And there's also a tendency to like think of clones as the end all be all, which I don't like from the sense of, life is a grocery store and I'll pick, a little splash of Buddhism and a little bit of Catholic and I'll just make what I want and it's all about me. Your site will trump what the clones do, but you do get some expression through those differences. I think we don't think enough about what rootstock does with clone also in conjunction with site. Yeah, just a lot of variables. I think having different clones is fantastic from an educational point of view. And early on, before I even planted the Sangiovese, the nursery that we bought the vines from, they had a growing ground out in Yolo County. Okay. And I would go out there and I'd look at how they were growing in, hot zone 4. Yeah. We're not quite that hot in Lake County most years, but I wanted to see like how they were performing and I could taste them on the vine, get these little different things. So I kind of previewed and thought about what the choices were. And that was great. It was super helpful. So if nothing else, clones are great for educational capacity. Like, do I want 100% Pommard Pinot Noir? Probably not. But it's kind of cool.
For someone that's not super familiar with Lake County, you want to give a description, sort of what, I guess maybe Lake County and then the vineyard in particular? I know you have a lot of, volcano, obviously. And
yeah, Lake County is actually very interesting. You can kind of think of it as a continuation of Napa Valley. If you just head north, if you've been up Napa Valley, Calistoga is sort of considered the northern portion. But if you go over the mountains there, you end up in Lake County. So the Mayacamas mountain range, and actually this is something I need to understand better. If you're driving north through Napa Valley, you have a mountain range on each side. You have the Mayacamas on one side and the Vaca range on the other side. Somehow north of Calistoga, when you drive over the 2,500-foot pass there, which is super beautiful, everybody should do it, the Mayacamas eat the Vaca range, or the Vacas somehow, I'm assuming over time, the way plates shift and, the tectonics and all that. So the Mayacamas range takes over these two, what appears to be a valley sort of joins into one, goes into Lake County, and then it opens up and the mountains go around the largest freshwater lake in California. So it's sort of like a ring of mountains. And it's actually a pretty large county. It's kind of like Mendocino, where the top half, most people haven't even seen the top half of it. Okay. It's big. It's vast. There are some snow-covered peaks up there. Of note is just it's a highly active volcanic area. So a lot of the geysers is the largest employer in the county, I think. That's where a lot of electrical power comes from. There are hundreds of earthquakes every day, little minor tremors. You can see the steam and the lights at night powering the turbines up on the hillside. So it kind of has an interesting feel of like, this is actually a young area. And technically the volcanic soils are very recent in the general scope of things. Okay. We are 2 miles away from the Mount Konocti volcano, which sits sort of right in the armpit of the lake. I think 14,000 years ago was the last time that erupted, and it's actually classified as a high-risk volcano. So, instead of old, really decomposed soils, these are young, within the idea of grape growing, like very fresh,
Yeah.
new, explored area. Historically, the wine business in Lake County, the problem is that it's just very isolated and it's surrounded by a ring of mountains. There were several plans to get a railroad into it, and that never happened. So obviously something like Prohibition, and you can't ship grapes out by just loading them into a grape car or a railroad car to go to New York. It's a good region for growing heat-hardy grapes. But it really was pretty dormant until the 60s when Kendall Jackson, some of the other people started. I think acreage got down to maybe 40 post-Prohibition. Like it was really tiny. There were maybe 1,000 acres in 1900. So there was a business, but you had to take wine pretty far.
Yeah.
And, you weren't bottling things at your winery then. You'd take it down to San Francisco to have it bottled. So that's a schlep. It wasn't really until getting into the 70s that some people realized, like, A, land is cheap here. B, there's water available in a lot of the areas because you've got not just the lake and the lake level, but because of the recent volcanic activity, there are actually high water tables.
Okay.
So some of these hillside, like Andy Beckstoffer has planted thousands of acres of cab up there, and they have water at 2,500 foot elevation, which is kind of remarkable. So those, you got resources up there. The lake area in the center of the county, the lake acts as really moderates temperature. So the lake is at about 1,300 feet. A lot of people are familiar with Lake County Sauvignon Blanc. You get this sort of, when it's 95 degrees where we are at the bench at the lake level, it's about 85 degrees. And then it's a little bit warmer at night. Okay. And it doesn't quite get the wind. So it has a nice, pick on September 1st, 23 bricks. You can take it where you want. You can either go tropical. You can pick early and go a little more on the green side. You can do, there's a fair amount of flexibility with it. So that lake area is good for also like medium bodied reds. If you want to do rich Zinfandel, Merlot, stuff like that can take, more of a compressed temperature range to build out a somewhat unctuous bottle for $16. That's a great place to do it. You can do that. But if you get up into the hills, like the Red Hills would be the most famous AVA, very red, volcanic, gravelly soil, a lot of obsidian, not a lot of water holding capacity because of that. Yeah. So you're going to have to irrigate. And some years, cool years, a lot of us have seen pictures of Obsidian Ridge picking Cabernet in the snow kind of thing. Wow. So yeah, it gets more extreme at that level. The season starts a little bit late and you get a lot of stomatal closure with wind. Okay. So you can actually get honest 14% cab that's spicy and minerally and just ripe enough, but it can be a push. Okay. It can be tough to achieve. Yeah. So Lake County, it has quite a few, and there are a couple, like Brassfield has their own sort of AVA area on the north side of the lake, or east side of the lake, I should say. Some really old soils out there, almost a completely different exposure. It's in an east-west valley, so they have a completely different wind pattern. Like, again, to compare it to Sonoma County, it's just a lot of variability, a lot of really unique things that stylistically, if I had to pick a place, like, all right, dude, California prices, what would be the most cost-effective business way to acquire or plant, ideally, I want to plant vineyards, plant 3 different vineyards for 3 different styles for the best possible return on investment. Like, I would actually be looking at Lake County as one of the leaders for that. Okay. So, it just, it's a little too far from San Francisco to have wine tourism. There are only 60,000, maybe 70,000 people in the county, so infrastructure is a little bit low. There are only a few restaurants and hotels I could recommend. It's very rugged. It feels like you're driving into Southern Oregon.
Yeah.
It's cool. I mean, it feels like the closest place that feels really far away. But that's also a little bit of a deterrent for some people. You know, I want to go from Calistoga luxury to shooting a gun on a horse kind of thing. So that polarity is there. But the grape potential is huge. A lot of people know that. A lot of Napa people were planting very actively because land is so much cheaper. There are other areas like where Langtree is out in Pope Valley, which hits Lake County.
Yeah.
Really neat stuff out there. Again, rugged. So you're not really going to be planting much Pinot. But as long as the grapes are heat tolerant and a little drought tolerant, you can do cool stuff.
And your vineyard, it's a couple 100 feet kind of above the lake?
A couple 100 feet above. Yeah, it's on bench land, which is the positive part would be that it's a moderate mix of several soil types. So it has enough clay to have some water holding capacity. It has enough gravel to be rocky. It has enough volcanic sand to have a texture that isn't too heavy or cloying. The downside of it would be that it's not sexy like Mount Etna, volcanic, or super extreme. Some of those vineyards down by the lake are former lake bed. They're like moon surface. It's very, very interesting. So I'm not sure my hesitation on the sexy value of terroir of the vineyard would be that it just isn't extreme in any one direction.
Okay.
But that offers the flexibility to do several different things.
Yeah.
So
have you found, is there a grape that you feel does especially well in your vineyard? Or in the area in general?
The grape that would probably do the best is the one that we don't have planted, which is Cabernet. Which, again, if I had a business plan, things would be different. Taking that back, Lake County Rhone varietals can be fantastic. Grenache obviously does well with heat. I think the heat curve in Lake County often does. I've got a friend that has Mourvèdre, which can be really good if we could just take care of the vines a little bit better and make some choices in the vineyard. You could either do the lighter Mourvèdre style or the full bore, meaty, stinky, super tannic.
Grenache is one of the few non-Italian grapes that you do have planted.
I planted it for rosé.
Okay.
Initially, it's I think it's Topless Creek Clone C, which is very, very light colored. And for the first couple of years, I started making rosé out of other things and just kind of got sidetracked with the original project. So I tried to beef up the Grenache, and I have a little bit of Petite Syrah, a few Syrah vines. For a while, I was air drying those and then adding them back into the Grenache, which was kind of cool, but didn't age very well. But then I've been going the opposite way and actually been throwing some whites into the Grenache and more whole cluster, and then just leaning into the lightness of it. And the last few years, it's been like this total strawberry and pepper point of joy. Like it's one of the few wines I make that I can just pop open and enjoy on its own and just be like, this is guilty pleasure.
Yeah.
It is a little bit hedonistic. It feels happy. It feels joyous. The one thing that's been surprisingly good up there consistently year after year has been Negro Amaro. Okay. So again, not, planting it a little bit as an experiment. But it handles the heat beautifully. They're very small bunches. Strangely enough, Negro Amaro does not like direct sunlight. So actually not over managing the vines.
Okay.
I manage them just enough to make sure we don't have mildew issues, but we'll actually leave a lot of shading. No dropping of crop because you only get 15 berries in a bunch anyway. They're just little tiny pyramids. And it's super pleasant. Just enough acidity to hold together, just enough tannin to hold together, but it has these really nice olive and fig and sometimes strawberry. Just these aromatics are kind of like sometimes what you wish Zinfandel from another country smelled like. Just, very, it has enough, like a bit of dark, stinky stuff to be engaging where you're like, what is, but it's at 14% alcohol. It's still rich and satisfying, but still food friendly. But I give it a pretty long maceration because the tannin's very fine and smooth in it. And I want to get a little bit gritty, over extracted seed tannin on the end, just to get some framing in there. So it has a little bit of substance and heft to it, like kind of defining the end of the palate when you drink it. Just so it's like, oh yeah, I'm rustic.
Yeah,
like I feel kind of polished, I feel kind of smooth, but oh yeah, there's like the old school Italian grandpa smoking a cigar. So that has actually probably been the big surprising, the one that I wish I'd planted more of because I want to make rosé out of it also. But the crop is so light that I just haven't sacrificed.
Yeah.
And other things like working with Sagrantino as the vines get older, that's being interesting. All the Sangiovese clones, some of the Barbera now is hitting 24, 20, over 20 years of age. So we're getting some minerality in that. Some of it's on the wrong roots. So just like everybody else, we're having a lot of, now that the vines are getting to be older, a lot of pruning wound issues, trunk diseases. So I'm constantly thinking about, we kind of need to retrain and restart some of the vines over and do some rehabilitation. Because our understanding of these disease pressures has changed a lot just in the last 10 years. And me going through and shoot things, I'm like living 5 hours away and like ripping things off the vine that was not doing them any favors. Because one of the challenges of managing 10,000 vines yourself is that everything wants to be taken care of at pretty much the same time. So something gets, and if you shoot thin Barbera too early, it will just resucker. Barbera is a sucker factory. So that's showing a pretty big, and the Ionico. The Ionico can be very, very good. In a way, it wraps up most of the things I like in red wine, including minerality and some of that. Like, it's a little bit abrasive. It's a little bit, it pushes back. But it's also very vintage sensitive. And Ionico, it's the last thing we pick every year. So it's a little bit of, there's some years that were too ripe. There are some years that were, some years should have got it earlier. Early on, I over-thinned it. And then it just kind of blew out into this Napa Cab style that sold well, but left an empty void in my heart. That's another one. We're leaving a few suckers and a little extra shading and, or maybe picking at 2 different times. One of the clones also has pretty bad red blotch, which early on was great because that means like 20% of it stops accumulating sugar at lower alcohol and it has a nice leathery sort of rustic feel to it, while the other one was polished, so you get a nice balance during the fermentation. But now I feel like it's... I'm not sure that it's an asset as the vines have continued to mature. And I think any vineyard owner, if you ask them if they're involved, like over time, there are all these things we wish, like I wish I had started the pruning differently. I wish instead of forcing the vines into production, I had slowed down and waited, because now I have all these issues going forward that I think is compromising fruit quality a little bit. So it's always a live and learn situation. What was the original question? Oh, Lake County.
No, that's
I think the future of Lake County too, once the wine industry bounces back, will be in stuff that isn't even grown there now. There are some really cool Portuguese grapes nearby. Tempranillo has sort of flitted around the edges as a possibility. Somebody will plant Nerello Mascalese at some point. White wines are, and even in my own vineyard, like, especially with the lack of equipment, like making crisp whites is super challenging. So the only thing we have is Chardonnay, which is cool because it's 25 years old now. And I do a stainless Chardonnay, which I actually like, just very much. The vines are old enough. They have some mineral, a year on lees. Maybe there's a tiny bit of stirring, but I don't want that to mar the wine. It's more like a purity of expression kind of thing. I'm not sure that there's anything in the way of really interesting white grapes planted in Lake County, partly because just the nature of the wine business, whites are kind of viewed as a turn and burn kind of thing. I mean, there actually is some good Pinot Blanc. I like heavy whites too. So things like Gewürztraminer, I'm not sure. It's probably a little too warm to get the hang time. I've bought whites from Mendocino County, like Tokai Friulano, from Potter Valley. That was great, but you're talking about a very different climate, like very cold and late ripening, and kind of the opposite of where we're at, which is a bit of a heat sink. So I would love to see some heat, get some Fiano planted up there, get some Greco, get some, so many interesting white grapes from all over the world, not just Italy.
Not just Italy.
Yeah,
okay.
Totally.
Yeah. I think earlier you kind of started on a description maybe of your winemaking style or your thoughts on it. And it seems like everything's kind of done by hand as much as possible with the...
Not always by choice.
With the pump beating things up. What's your kind of philosophy, I guess?
Yeah. Again, like the platitudes can be pretty generic, like do little and don't screw it up. There's that, especially with narrow and deep things. It sort of magnifies the decisions that you make, but you make decisions every step of the way. So yeah, I mean, I'm minimalist. I also harbor the dream of making 100,000 cases of $10 wine that's the best damn wine I could make with high-tech machinery. Like that's equally interesting to me as well. I just don't have those resources or haven't had that opportunity yet. So while I say, minimalist, transparency, varietal correctness is important to me, I think that's part of good technique. Or you just don't use a grape cultivar name. You can call it whatever the hell you want. I mean, if you want to blend 40 different grapes together, great. But don't call it Barbera.
Yeah.
I think that was a Randall Graham discussion at some point where if you are going to put a cultivar name on it, there's some sort of tacit assumption that you will deliver an idea or at least a representation of something that is authentic to the general understanding. I could certainly find a counter argument for that, but yeah, I don't really gravitate towards blends, just because I really like to feel like I'm getting a deep window into something. So I think that's probably maybe reflected in the philosophy a little bit, is just trying to get a sense of purity, even with those beautiful points and warty, like little bits that stick out over time.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't want to add anything more than is necessary. Now, I do believe in minimal sulfur. I have found that my overall sulfurs... So I sort of accidentally became a student of Clark Smith's, if you're familiar with him.
Yeah,
postmodern winemaking.
Yeah.
And
It's an in-depth book.
I love Clark. But I wouldn't compare myself to him because to me, Clark is a scientist who desperately wants to be an artist. And some of us are tortured to be craftspeople who can't be an artist or a scientist, which is kind of how I see myself. So take everything with a grain of salt. But a lot of the things that Clark ended up writing about, I was simultaneously observing in Lake County making wine. Because like 2008 was my first real vintage making stuff. And people wanted 16%. I was adding oak staves to stuff. And you go through the books of like, oh, this makes cherry flavors. August. So there's that whole period.
Yeah.
And that lasts about a year or two. And then unfortunately, like for me, we had mechanical failure with the tractor one year, pretty bad mildew in the vineyard.
Okay.
When you get mildew, you get a lot of dehydration in the grapes. Like I think I picked most of the stuff by myself in passes of 2 to 3 times, like trying to protect everything. And unfortunately, what happened was that all these wines were over 16%, and they all got double gold medals and all this shit. And it reinforced it some like the worst of the moment, which is like 1 ton per acre. I've never liked oak much. But acidity and just, trying to build really big wines through managing the vines, that took over for a couple of years until like I just realized like where am I at this point? I'm also like the tannin was so gritty, and with the alcohol that high, like those ugly warts, they become boils. Like everything, the aromatics are just sticking out everywhere. And nothing is like, it's all very surface level. There's no real depth to it. Or at least for me, I wasn't getting, it was kind of eclipsing any minerality and stuff like that. So I went through that cycle. And then when I started drawing back from that, and I was observing stuff like, too, like what happens if I don't add any sulfur to this for 9 months after malolactic is, it's like, oh, it actually seems to need less sulfur to get it stable into a bottle and have some longevity, and the tannin feels different. So Clark was writing about these things at the same time. And in parallel, I was sort of understanding some of my observations were like, oh, the minimalist thing. And of course, he is a maximalist where, if he can reverse osmosis and do this and do that and add this and take that away, then you can get to where you want to be. I think he believes in purity too. I don't have those toys to play with. So that wasn't a route that I could take. But definitely like structural stuff, tannin, acid, alcohol levels, and how important that is for just how the wine presents itself. That became really apparent. And he'll talk your ear off about, he was kind of the guy who invented dealcoholization and being able to bring your 14.7 down to 13.2 and get below the tax level. So really interesting stuff that's out of my pay grade. But you can get to a lot of those things if you get to manage your own vineyard, which was the asset that I have. And that goes back to your initial question of like, how did I get into wine? It wasn't through wine. It wasn't through Provence Rosé or drinking Brunello in Tuscany. It was through these stupid old vines that had been neglected and were grizzled, but somehow had this magical wisdom thing going on. So I guess at the core of that is, anything I plant, I want it to be around for 100 years, and I want it to have a transparency to express something about what it is, which just gets us back to the same place of like, I want to speak terroir, which I agree with 100%, but makes me want to jump off a ledge when I say it. It's so trite. And this business is so full of empty, beautiful, empty. I mean, it's the wine business. Some of the worst human beings I know are some of the main people in the wine business and some of the best people I know. The wine business is conflicted in a way between privilege and small business and the economy of wine and immigration and like all these things are sort of blowing up all at once that, it keeps me up at night that it's the most beautiful thing in the world. And especially here in Northern California, like a grotesquerie of sorts. So, and how do we sort of get back to a place where it's a little more healthy? And what would that even look like? I don't know. There was a book that came out that I was thinking about this morning. There was a little bit of a socioeconomic analysis. I can't remember who the author was. I think it was somebody on the young side because it was a little bit of a postmodern hot take mess, like a lot of the books can be. But that there has always been, the gentleman farmer ideal stretches back way before 1700, 18, like it's Dark Ages, Rome. There's always been this very peculiar aura around wine that's simultaneously, it's like mysterious, but also like, I'm a simple peasant. It's like, but today it's like, yeah, but you're also a millionaire. And this just peculiar thing that somehow we're all in the wine business, and these little people in Puglia that all own half an acre and take it to the co-op and get $20 for their 1,000 kilo of grapes every year are the same as the Bordeaux Chateau and Gallo, and it's just a whole other fascinating world of just like, especially now that we're all thinking politically a little bit more and things are shifting. We've got tariffs and all sorts of things on the horizon. I'm starting to work in a new county now, and a lot of small vineyards out there. And even those folks who are pretty disconnected from the general turn and burn wine industry are saying, like, we may not have anybody to help us in the vineyards. What do we do? So I feel like there may be a beneficial reframing, but there's going to be some pain in the meantime.
Yeah. And new counties, La Marinda, right? I guess Contra
Costa, nearby Contra Costa. Yeah. Which was, so there's Contra Costa County. And when people think of Contra Costa, they mostly think of the eastern, like around Brentwood, where there are a lot of really cool 100-year-old vineyards. It's very hot out there, sandy soils. I'm blanking, but if you like people like Bedrock, I'm sure you can name
Oakley, Antioch, Evangelo, and Gonsalves,
Evangelo for sure,
Delbarba, and kind of
really unique area. La Marinda is sort of the opposite of that, but it has some effect from that. So it's on the other side of Contra Costa County and abuts the Oakland and Berkeley Hills. So, and it's a small AVA. I want to say that there are only, I'm not even sure I should say this out loud. I want to say that there are only 60 acres in the whole AVA.
Okay.
It's almost like Malibu in that way. Lots of small micro vineyards, half acre, maybe 2 acres.
Yeah.
All hillside viticulture, though. It's a very, it's all folding small valleys.
Yeah.
And that area out there, Contra Costa County, if you think about it, was at one point all underwater. And Mount Diablo, if you're familiar with Walnut Creek, Mount Diablo would have been an island towering over Walnut Creek, which would have been underwater. So I also get to work with new soil types. It's all sandstone and clay, and actually there is a volcanic pocket out there too as you get closer to the Berkeley Hills. And I'm sure there are a lot of micro. It's hard to just. We talk a lot about soil. We look at the dirt and we say like, oh, that dirt's red. Really doesn't tell you much about what's 3 feet underneath the dirt. So it's hard to sometimes make guesses. But yeah, a lot of sedimentary sandstone, clay mix. I've only worked with vineyards out there for 1 season, but the grapes show that. Like they show some of that hillside structure. They show some of that sort of medium weight spicy profile. It's definitely not like Rutherford Valley floor density. It's more like a good, I feel like some of the things that I really like in wine, having that verticality and that sort of crystalline interior. Even like one of the reasons I like Sangiovese is exactly why California winemakers hate it, because it has this big gaping hole in the middle. And I'm like, well, that's where all your dreams go, bud, is right there in that hole. I feel like there's a little bit out there. Some of the Pinot from the cooler areas get a lot of fog in some of the spots. Great. Some of the Merlot has been like shockingly good. There's some not much. Just got 2 barrels, but it's 2 barrels of really nice Syrah that shows almost, I guess, from 7 different vineyards, but it's almost a little bit like Sicilian Syrah, where it's like, it's definitely warm climate, but it's definitely also spicy, olivey, peppery, sort of this continuum that's still not super overripe Syrah going for density, but instead has those things that are really neat. And I'm weird in that I have more experience making Aglianico than I do Cabernet Sauvignon.
Okay. Yeah.
So
not too many can say that in California, probably.
So where most people would be like, oh my God, I got to go make cab somewhere else. I'm actually excited about it. And these cab vineyards going from the warm end to the cool end are all radically different. Nobody seems to know what clones they have or what roots. So there's like an extra layer of intrigue with them. Starting to visit more and more of the vineyards and see what's going on with them. So it's a fun, exciting project.
Yeah, I've always been struck. I've only been to a couple of the vineyards there, but just steep valleys.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
I mean,
there are steep valleys.
Really hillside is putting it lightly, I feel like, for some of the vineyards.
No, there are, legit 30, 40 degree. I mean, one of the challenges is because these vineyards are all nestled in forest land, you have to bird net everything.
Okay.
Everything. Because it's not just the birds, the skunks, deer, squirrel, like everything is there impinging. But I feel like that proximity also is going to add some unique, whether or not it's, the eucalyptus trees, that sort of thing, terroir, as it were. Really, but it's challenging viticulture. I mean, it's all backpack spraying.
Right.
It's, I have yet to see a tractor there.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So a lot of
and then
manual work.
Yeah, a lot of manual work at a time when that's challenging. But also that's a lot of, these are all young vineyards, so a lot of it's very uniform. Like, this is how we do it. It's bilateral cordon, da-da-da-da-da. There will also be people who are like, well, why aren't we head training? Why are we even using trellises at all? Why aren't we, there will be exploration. It's a young area. So it takes a while to really understand vines. And then, at some point you'll get a generation of newer people who are involved and then be like, oh, wow, I hadn't thought about, that style or that take on this. It'll be interesting if more white grapes go in there as well.
Yeah. Have you come across anything that seems to have good potential in that area? Yeah.
A couple pockets for Pinot, definitely. I mentioned Syrah and Merlot. Some of the cab is great. Great in that middle ground where it's not like 16%. It's not the biggest, darkest cab, but that it's got, it's got the cassis, it's got the pepper, it's got the red and black fruit. I like it when it has that little bit of, well, I shouldn't say this because I just went to the Bordeaux tasting. 22s are way too California for me. It's a lot of oak and plum, but very different vintage.
And what about for white or?
Yeah, there's some Chardonnay, some, I know there's a little bit of Viognier, which we did not receive last year. I think the birds got it.
Okay.
A little bit of Sauvignon Blanc. The whites are not I don't have clarity on. I've only worked with a little bit out there.
Yeah.
And it is hillside. So you're not talking about 10 tons to an acre focusing on acidity.
Right.
It'll be a lot leaner crop. Then the question becomes like stylistically what, and whites, they allow a little more of an imprint to, not just how the grapes are managed, but as a winemaker, like, are we going for the bright and crunchy or are we going for the round? And then of course this is a business. I also have to figure out like, what do the people out there want?
Yeah.
So that's always an important third force. So there will be a tasting room opening. We're shooting for May 1st in Lafayette. And there will be 8 brands. Oh, and a cider producer who does Method Champenois cider.
Wow, very cool.
Nearby. Yeah,
Okay.
really, really cool ciders. A couple Pet Natty styles, but like actual hand riddled cool stuff.
Yeah.
And then some of my own wines will be available there too. So I will be the outlier. The rest of it will all be Contra Costa County, La Marinda for the most part.
Okay.
I'll be the one Lake County weirdo with Refosco in the tasting room. We'll see how that works out.
Just switching topics a little bit, but yeah, I'd love to hear about, the labels of your wines.
Oh, like the actual
Also,
labels.
yeah. I know going back to the, I guess, alchemy books, and is that something from your philosophy background or
Not overtly, but it when I was trying to come up with, I had been making wine in Lake County under a different label, and I wanted to split out into my own label, start my own business, and just trying to figure out it's like a blank slate. Like, what kind of label what do I want it to look like? And much like the wine one, something that was sort of simple but detailed. Alchemy themes were kind of a natural mix, but they felt a little bit clunky. So I had lists of, Greek terms and kind of fell into the alchemy stuff. Some of the imagery, I think that was how I first got into these things. Yeah. It's like, this is really even today, I don't know exactly what this picture of, the sun, the tiger, the lion eating the green sun of Mercury with the moon in the background and the stars, what that means. So there was also a sense of mystery to it. It's like, these could be pretty cool label images. Read up a little bit on alchemies, just sort of sat on it for a while. And then it's like, okay, I need to be a responsible business person. How much of this is already trademarked? It's like, these images are public use. I can buy them for $19.99. And Prima Materia is not trademarked in California. Okay. So just sort of put those things together. And I was a little more focused when I opened the tasting room in Oakland in 2019 that I was going to be cooking as well.
Okay.
So my plan was, rolling pasta on Friday nights, in front of people in this little 200 square foot area. Did not quite work out as intended. Okay. But Prima Materia with a food component felt like it had even more soup to nuts sort of meaning, transformation, and through careful manipulation the substance moves to a higher matter, but then it also reflects back on the person making it, so that the person who is doing these alchemical things is learning something and exploring their own psychology in that way. So you can get into the whole Jungian thing, but doesn't have to be. But grapes to wine, like alchemy, it just sort of fell into place. And these label images were really cool. And there was sort of an infinite number of them available. So at one point, I think I had 24 SKUs, which is way too much. Don't do that for a 2,000 case winery. Yeah. It's been cool. I'm still trying to understand alchemy. I think I actually, my rational mind, I think I have something of a block that is just preventing me from opening my soul sufficiently to allow the alchemical meta entity to enter myself. It's like that. Yeah. Yeah. That kind of thing. So it's also kind of fascinating to me.
Yeah. You might have to go back 5 centuries or so.
Yeah. Embracing the irrational is not my strong point. A little too much of a planner, but it's also life lessons. Everything is going to keep showing you the same life lesson over and over and over, like it or not.
Where do you see the winery in say 5 years?
Oh, that's a good question. Very timely question. Yesterday, I made the decision to close the tasting room. Okay. I will pass that along to somebody else. This downturn has affected me pretty badly. But it also has timed out with, now that I'm 52, my 4.5 hour commute to Lake County to go work for free every day. I can't do it anymore. And so getting, I know that sounds terrible, so boo-hoo. So I'm super, I'm not sunsetting the label, but we may go into hibernation for a little bit here.
Okay.
Want to make sure that the vines are still doing okay. I would like to think that right now I've owned my own business now for 8 years, and I'm starting to work for somebody else, which is giving me a sense of stability that the last few years, I mean, I survived COVID and then post-COVID and then, all this stuff. And you get your San Francisco Chronicle article and you get this big thing and then you get this other thing and then nothing happens, and sort of the ups and downs of trying to build a brand. I'm ready to take a little vacation from that and having my rent paid by that. So Prima Materia will continue. I've got a bunch of inventory of really good aging wines, like the Nebbiolo, the Aglianico, Sagrantino. They're only going to get better for another 5 years. So I want to make sure that, been up in Lake County a little bit, pruning Nebbiolo vines. When the stars aligned to sort of come out of hibernation, I think we'll be there and ready for that. In the meantime, this Contra Costa project is affording me the ability to take a lot of the lessons I've learned in the last 8 years, starting my own business, from TTB compliance to taxes to accounting, and employ those for somebody else who is starting out. And, you don't correct the mistakes, but you sort of overcome and learn, like, oh, this is how it should be done for the next time.
Yeah.
So, and I'm really excited to be walking in other people's vineyards and looking at the pruning and looking at the aspect and talking to folks who are receptive and interested in, like, how can we make better wine? How can we sort of elevate the AVA? Is, very few people know it even exists.
Yeah.
So there's this whole other side to it. Like, how do we get Lamar into the discussion of good California wines? And then for me, secondarily, like, what even is Lamar? Like, what is our profile? What is our place? What is this thing going to be like? And that's super interesting to me. So this is encapsulating, like, I'm back hands-on with the grapes. I'm still spraying out the crusher. I'm still tasting every barrel. And I can tell you what's in every barrel. But I'm also meeting new growers, seeing different ways to do things, working a little bit on the business side. I'll be training employees. Some of the other stuff I can do too. So it's a large, multifaceted puzzle.
Yeah.
And then, hopefully we'll see what happens over the next couple of years. At some point, the wine industry is going to clear itself out a little bit, which we desperately needed. There are too many brands. That whole thing. I mean, and I'm part of that. I could make a business, so I made a business, and it worked for a little while. So, but having 1,500 labels in Napa may not be a sustainable model for everybody.
Yeah.
Hopefully, I think, if you at 36,000 foot view, as long as your time frame is long enough, even you were doing the historical series. Yeah. Late 1800s, 1900s, boom and crash, boom and crash, boom and crash.
No, it was every 8 years or so.
Yeah. I mean, it really does seem to be like
there was one every decade.
Yeah. No, it feels like I think somebody said that it's actually a 7-year cycle.
Okay.
Between consumer interest and then the agricultural sector. And then probably just, everybody's planting Muscat 2 years after everybody wanted Muscat. That sort of problem. Wine has this beautiful, the one unmanageable feature in the wine industry is time.
Yeah.
Like, we're always either behind or too early. Or like, I just saw an article like Calatal is finally here. It's like, oh my God, you just told me I was a has-been for the last 15 years. But, it just takes one peculiar moment to upend everything. So, And ultimately, any winemaking and grape growing knowledge I acquire working out in another county is going to double back to, I have not done sparkling yet. So I have this, it's time to do a pet nat.
Yeah.
It's time to do, I really like the carbonic Nebbiolo I did a couple of years ago. So maybe I'll just make 2 tons of that and have, little things like that are super interesting and that keep keep the brand alive and, at least like here's something new for it.
Yeah.
And just focus down instead of going. I mean, when I had 6 different distributors, then it felt pretty good. Like, we're building.
Yeah.
And now that it's just one,
Right.
it's a little bit different.
Is there anything you feel like we kind of missed or glossed over, or anything that you'd like to discuss?
Yeah, so many thoughts. Man, I just hope the FDA figures out what they're doing. I hope somehow YouTube puts the brakes on advertising health stuff with anti-alcohol messaging. We all know ethanol is not good for your body. We really threw the Mediterranean diet under the bus, and we were all like, okay.
Yeah.
The flip side of that is that kind of given too much leeway for a while with the wine industry when it was economically booming, and you had, the lobbying industry was pretty powerful.
Yeah.
I mean, Mendavi made it so we didn't have to pay sales tax on new barrels. Like, you beat the government. Holy cow. That's some power right there. I want to think that retroactively, maybe 5 years down the road, we look back on this period as something transitional. But I want to hope that we get something valuable for the future out of it. Whether it's a different... Yeah, I just have questions. Like, I'm not even sure I have any thoughts right now.
Yeah. Between
the labor, between the sales, between the marketing. I mean, I need to stop being involved in marketing conversations on LinkedIn because people are hating me because it's just the same marketing all over and over and over again. Yes, it's consumer centric. Yes, you need to meet the customer where they're at, blah, blah, blah. Doesn't fix any of the structural issues right now. And I want to imagine this industry can continue to support small producers, and it's feeling right now like it can't, and that doesn't feel good. Like, again, we're just sort of seeing that evaporation of the middle everywhere and polarization. I feel like that's being mirrored a little bit in the wine industry. And I really hope that doesn't go too far, because you really do need weirdos, and you need your Gideons, you need your Clark Smiths just as much as you need. We also need wine for $10 a bottle. Don't get me wrong. Like, Gallo has done some horrible things, but some of the DNA of the company, like acquiring great vineyards and making great, like, some of that is good and semi-noble. And I hope the industry gets back to a place where it feels like we can all have a place within it, rather than either just being vertically integrated by Brown-Forman buy-ups, or, all of us making the same wine and, Terran Soth, or, using the same, it's Pinot, it goes into blah, blah, blah. I think it's a shift, though. I think the days of $70 Russian River Pinot that all tastes the same, I think that might be behind us, but I don't know what's ahead of us. So, yeah, I got no answers.
Well, what's the best place for people to either get your wines or taste the wines?
Yeah, the website is pretty good. All the available wines are there, prima-materia.com. Tasting room will be open for at least another month. And then it will be shifting to Lafayette, largely because I'm the one who stands at the tasting room at this point. There was a time when I had employees, but that's changed. So, I love geeking out over wine. You don't even have to buy anything. The thing that makes me happy is just a customer or a person who actually asks questions and is engaged. So that's great. Hopefully starting May, the more serious bottlings like the Nebbiolo, Ionico, things like that will be available in Lafayette. It will be called Local Vines, and the winery will be in the basement. So it's kind of and actually I didn't mention that so it's a small but fairly sized building. Tasting room can probably seat 40 people. There's a deck, and we'll do like a Thursday night pizza night kind of thing. But the other half of the building is a professional kitchen. that is sort of a food incubator that will be leased out to different people who need space
Oh,
for
interesting.
their food
Very
businesses,
cool.
which also allows the ability to like, oh, you mean I get to do that Barolo dinner that I've been planning for so long?
Yeah.
There were a couple wine dinners at the tasting room that I really like. We did the wines of the Odyssey, sort of circling around. I had a menu for that. A couple other things. We did the Dante's Inferno through wine. So I was not happy with the menu that I wrote for that. So I was also trying to execute these things while also coming out and talking about the wines.
Yeah.
And then, doing
Small
dishes
space
till
and- yeah.
2 a.m. But I wrote a second menu because I was so unhappy with the first menu.
Okay.
So in a little bit, I in a way, I'm hoping to do some of the things that I had planned in my tasting room, but with slightly more in the way of resources.
Yeah.
Hoping to teach little classes to, like, explore Sagrantino for the day kind of thing.
Very cool.
I don't think there's much of that happening out on that side of the county. So hopefully it can be, elevate the general interest in wine some way. I hate using education. Like, people don't necessarily need to be educated, but they do need to be enchanted and curious. So if we can help move that ball forward, then that'd be great.
Thanks for listening today. Pietro's exploration of Italian varieties in Lake County has been fun to watch and drink. The La Morinda wine should be fascinating too. It's an area I've always thought had a lot of potential, and it's so close to Oakland with steep, interesting hillsides and valleys. You can find Pietro's wines at prima-materia.com and the new tasting room and project at local-vines.com. Follow him on Instagram at prima_materia_wine. And be on the lookout for that Local Vines tasting room in Lafayette opening soon. You can follow the podcast on wherever you're listening and the Instagram at Indie Wine Podcast. And feel free to email indiewinepodcast@gmail.com with comments, questions, or feedback. If you're enjoying the podcast, I'd love it if you told a friend or wine lover about it and help spread the word. Rating, reviewing, or donating at patreon.com/indiewinepodcast helps too. It all goes to offsetting podcast expenses and allows for more episodes. We'll be back soon with another episode. Have a good one.